The suitcase was open on the bed when Frances Dean came home from burying her husband. It was the blue one with the broken wheel, the one she and Harold had taken to Fargo for his heart appointments. Someone had folded 3 pairs of slacks into it. Her nightgown lay on top, along with 2 sweaters, a hairbrush, and the brown shoes she wore to the funeral. Frances stood in the bedroom doorway with her black coat still buttoned. Justin was pulling shirts from her side of the closet. His wife, Melissa, carried them into the hall. Rhonda was in the bathroom, emptying the medicine cabinet into a plastic grocery bag. "What are you doing?" Frances asked. Justin looked over his shoulder. He was Harold's son, 42 years old, broad through the chest like his father had once been. That afternoon, even the way he held a hanger made Frances think of Harold. "The movers are coming Thursday," he said. "We thought we'd get your things together. My things are together. They're in this house." Rhonda appeared with the grocery bag. "We talked about this at Ernest's office." "You talked," Frances said. "I was sitting there." Nobody answered that. 2 hours earlier, family attorney Ernest Harvey had opened Harold's will in a small meeting room at the funeral home. The flowers from the service were still being carried to cars. Frances could smell lilies on her own sleeves. Harold's will had been signed in 1999, 1 year after he married Frances. It left the Birchwood Street house, his savings, and his vehicles to Justin and Rhonda. Ernest said he'd searched the files and contacted every firm Harold had used for ordinary business. There was no later will. Frances had listened with both hands around a paper cup of coffee she didn't drink. She'd known Harold wanted his children protected. The house had been their family home before she moved into it. He'd said that many times. What Frances hadn't known was that, after 28 years of marriage, the papers still treated her like someone passing through. She'd looked at Ernest and asked, "Are you sure there isn't another page?" Ernest had removed his glasses, cleaned them, and put them back on. "I'm sorry, Frances." That was when Justin began talking about Thursday. Now Frances walked into the bedroom and took one of her blouses from his hand. "You could have waited until tomorrow." "We don't have time," Justin said. "The house needs to be cleared before it can be listed." "You're listing it." He gave Rhonda a quick look. They'd already agreed on that. Frances saw it plainly. Rhonda tied the handles of the grocery bag. "Neither of us is moving back to Botano." "Then why does it need to be empty this week?" "Because it's easier to deal with things now," Justin said. "For whom?" Melissa stopped in the hall. She was carrying Frances's good winter robe over one arm. She didn't look comfortable, but she didn't put the robe back. Justin exhaled through his nose. "Frances, please. Dad's funeral was today. I'm aware of that. We're all upset." Frances set her blouse on the bed. Harold had slept on the other side of that bed for nearly 3 decades. His reading lamp was still angled toward his pillow. A glass of water sat on the nightstand, half full from the last night he'd been home. She picked up the glass and carried it to the bathroom. Rhonda stepped aside. Frances poured the water into the sink. Then she rinsed the glass, dried it with the hand towel, and returned it to the nightstand. She didn't know why that mattered. It simply did. "Where am I meant to go?" she asked. Rhonda's face tightened. For a second, she looked less like the woman who had just inherited a house, and more like a tired daughter who'd spent the morning beside her father's casket. "There's a room at the Prairie Motor Lodge," she said. "Justin paid for 3 nights. 3? Just until you arrange something." Frances looked at Justin. "You paid? It's taken care of." He said it as if that settled the difficult part. Justin had convinced himself there was no kind way to do what had to be done. Since no kind way existed, he preferred a quick one. He had a business loan due, 2 trucks that needed repairs, and a checking account he hadn't discussed honestly with Melissa. The Birchwood house looked like relief to him. He couldn't afford to see it as Frances's home. Rhonda wanted it sold for different reasons. Her marriage had ended the previous autumn. Her job at a medical supply office had disappeared soon after. She'd spent months feeling that everything solid could be taken away, while other people watched. The house on Birchwood Street was one of the few things she still associated with her father before Frances. She told herself selling it was better than watching Frances stay there and slowly make it impossible to recover. Neither of them asked Frances what she had done to keep that house running. They knew, in the general way families know inconvenient facts. They knew Frances had handled the bills when Harold's hands began to shake. They knew she'd learned the names of every pill and which ones made him dizzy. They knew she'd slept on a narrow chair beside his hospital bed and driven through sleet to collect a prescription. But care disappears easily when nobody writes a dollar amount beside it. Frances opened the top dresser drawer. Her underclothes were gone. Melissa had packed those too. "Leave the room," Frances said. "Frances," Justin began. "I said leave the room, all of you." Something in her voice ended the discussion. Melissa put the robe on the bed. Rhonda carried the medicine bag into the hallway. Justin stayed a moment longer. "The movers need the space," he said quietly. Frances looked at him. He left. She closed the door and locked it. Then she sat beside the suitcase without removing her funeral coat. On the dresser stood a photograph from the county fair. Harold was holding a paper tray of fried dough, and Frances was laughing because powdered sugar had landed on his tie. The photograph had been taken long before his illness. Harold looked thick-haired, impatient, and pleased with himself. Frances reached for the frame. She stopped before touching it. She could hear the others moving through the house. Cabinet doors opened downstairs. Boxes scraped across the floor. Justin spoke to somebody on the telephone about a dining set. The family had begun dividing the rooms while Harold's grave was still covered with loose earth. Frances didn't cry. The tears had come that morning when she tried to knot Harold's blue tie for the funeral director and realized her hands wouldn't do it. David Hughes had waited without rushing her. Finally, he'd tied it himself. Now there was no room for tears. There were too many practical questions. Her name was on one checking account with a little over $600 in it. The larger savings account had been Harold's alone. Her monthly Social Security deposit would arrive near the end of March. She had no lease, no car, and no key to the house once Justin changed the locks. She took the photograph from the dresser and laid it between her sweaters. Then she opened the closet. Most of Harold's suits had been removed before the funeral. Justin had chosen one for the burial. Rhonda had claimed a brown leather jacket because she remembered him wearing it on road trips. 2 boxes of shirts were marked for donation. Harold's old wool overcoat wasn't there. Frances searched behind the hanging clothes anyway. It was charcoal gray, heavy enough for a North Dakota January, with broad lapels and a satin lining that had been repaired more than once. Harold had worn it for years. He wore it to funerals, church suppers, courthouse errands, and every winter appointment when Frances could persuade him not to leave the house in a work jacket. She unlocked the bedroom door. Justin was carrying a box toward the stairs. "Where's Harold's overcoat?" He shifted the box against his stomach. "Which one?" "The wool one." "I don't know. Funeral home, maybe." Frances remembered then. David had asked the family to bring an outer coat for the visitation because the burial suit looked incomplete without one. The overcoat had been draped over a chair in the preparation room. They hadn't used it during the service. "Will you pick it up?" she asked. Justin frowned. "Why?" "Because it was his." "We've got enough of his clothes. I didn't ask whether you had enough." Rhonda came up the stairs carrying an empty carton. "That old coat?" "Yes." "The lining's coming apart," Rhonda said. "Dad hadn't worn it properly in years. He wore it last winter." "Then you take it. I don't have a car." Justin adjusted the box again. "I'll call David. He can put it with the donations." Frances stared at him. "Don't donate it. You want to keep a man's overcoat? I want one coat that still smells like my husband." Justin looked away first. "All right," he said. "We'll deal with it later." Later was a word Frances had trusted for years. Harold would update the paperwork later. They would talk to the children later. They would decide whether to sell the house later. There always seemed to be another season ahead of them. Harold's heart condition changed that, but more slowly than people imagined. He wasn't struck down in one dramatic moment. He declined by inches. In 2020, the cardiologist explained that Harold's heart was weakening and wouldn't recover. Frances wrote every instruction in a green notebook. She recorded his weight each morning, his blood pressure after lunch, and the swelling around his ankles at night. Harold hated the notebook. "You'll turn me into a weather report," he told her once. "You're stormy before breakfast and windy after beans." He laughed so hard she worried about him, which only made him laugh more. For several years, their life became a series of small adjustments. Frances moved the bedroom downstairs when Harold could no longer manage the steps comfortably. She put a chair in the shower. She learned which grocery store kept the low-salt soup he could tolerate. When his fingers grew stiff, she buttoned his cuffs but let him tie his own shoes, because there were kinds of help Harold accepted and kinds he didn't. Justin called most Sundays. Rhonda came for Christmas when she could. They loved their father, but they preferred the version of him who could sit at the table for 2 hours and tell familiar stories. They didn't see the nights Francis woke to listen for his breathing. They didn't see Harold standing at the kitchen counter at midnight, ashamed because he couldn't open a pill bottle. The last winter was harder. Snow pressed against the back steps. The furnace made a knocking sound that Harold kept promising to examine. Francis told him to leave it alone, then called a repairman after he went to sleep. In January, Harold asked her to bring his wool overcoat from the upstairs closet. "You're not going anywhere," she said. "I'd like to look at it." She carried it down and laid it across his knees. Harold ran his hand along the cuff. Gordon Richards, the tailor on Main Street, had repaired that cuff sometime in 2024. Harold said he'd caught it on a nail, though Francis had never seen the tear. "Still a good coat," he said. "It weighs more than I do. That's why it's warm." He folded it carefully and asked her to put it back upstairs. At the time, Francis thought he was having one of those private moments people have with old possessions. Harold had owned the coat longer than he'd known her. She didn't ask what he was thinking. There would be time later. On the second Tuesday in March, Harold woke before dawn and said he couldn't catch his breath. Francis called the ambulance, unlocked the front door, and put his medication list on the kitchen table. She knew the routine. She even remembered to turn on the porch light. Harold died at the hospital that afternoon. His last clear words to her were ordinary. "Did you eat?" She told him she had. He knew she was lying, but he was too tired to argue. 3 days later, Francis stood beside his casket while people told her Harold had lived a full life. She thanked them. She accepted casseroles she had nowhere to store. She shook hands until her fingers hurt. David Hughes stayed near without hovering. He'd been a funeral director long enough to recognize the relatives who needed guidance and the ones who needed distance. Francis needed both, though never at the same moment. After the burial, Ernest asked the immediate family to remain for the will reading. That was how Francis went from the cemetery to a legal meeting without having eaten more than half a dinner roll. Ernest's office was only a few streets away, but Justin said it would be simpler to use the funeral home's meeting room. They sat around a rectangular table under soft lights. Somebody had left a box of tissues in the middle. Ernest read the date of the will. Francis lifted her head. 1999? "That's correct," he said. Justin leaned back. Rhonda went still. Ernest continued. "The house at Birchwood Street passed to Harold's 2 children in equal shares. The savings passed to them. The pickup and sedan passed to them. Personal property could be divided by agreement." Francis waited for her name. It appeared only once, identifying her as Harold's wife. When Ernest finished, she asked about a later will. He said none had been found. "Harold wouldn't leave her with nothing," Rhonda said. For one hopeful second, Francis looked at her. Then Rhonda added, "There must be something she already owns." "I own my clothes," Francis said. Ernest cleared his throat. "We can review account titles. Anything jointly owned would pass outside the will. The house wasn't jointly owned. Neither were the savings or vehicles." Justin rubbed both hands over his face. "Dad always said the house stayed with us." "He said it was your home, too," Francis replied. "That's not the same thing. It's what he wanted. You don't know what he wanted yesterday. You know what he signed 27 years ago." Melissa touched Justin's arm. It wasn't comfort. It was a warning not to say too much. Ernest gathered the papers into a neat stack. "Nobody needs to make every decision this afternoon." Justin looked at him. "How soon can we list the house?" That was the answer Francis remembered. By early evening, she was sitting on the edge of her bed beside the open suitcase. The sun had gone down. The bedroom window reflected her own dark shape and the warm room behind her. Someone knocked. "Francis," Melissa said, "we brought you some food. I'm not hungry. You should eat something." Francis almost laughed. Harold had said the same thing before he died. She opened the door. Melissa held a plate covered in foil. Justin stood behind her with Francis's handbag and winter boots. "The lodge room is ready," he said. "You expect me to leave tonight? It'll be less confusing with people coming tomorrow." "For the movers." "Yes." Francis looked past them. Rhonda was downstairs, wrapping dishes in newspaper. Each movement made a dry, careful sound. Francis took the plate from Melissa and placed it on the dresser. Then she zipped the suitcase. It wouldn't close at first. The framed photograph made the top bulge. Francis opened the case, removed one sweater, and handed it to Melissa. "Put that in a box with my name." Melissa took it. Francis tried again. The zipper closed. Justin carried the suitcase downstairs. The damaged wheel bumped against each step. Francis followed with her handbag and boots. She wore her funeral coat because nobody had packed another. At the front door, she turned toward the living room. Harold's chair stood beside the lamp. His reading glasses were still on the table. A shallow dent remained in the cushion. "I want the glasses," she said. Rhonda looked up from the dining room floor. "Take them." Frances crossed the room, folded the glasses, and slipped them into her handbag. She took her house key from the ring. Justin watched her. "You can keep it until Thursday." "No." She placed the key on the little table by the door. If they wanted her out, they would have to know they'd put her out. She wouldn't help them call it something gentler. Justin carried the suitcase to his truck. Frances sat beside Melissa in the back. Nobody spoke during the short drive to the Prairie Motor Lodge. The room smelled of bleach and old carpet. It had one bed, a small television, and a coffee machine with 2 paper packets beside it. Justin set the suitcase near the wall. 3 nights are paid," he said. Frances removed her gloves 1 finger at a time. "And after that, we'll talk tomorrow." "No, we won't. You'll be busy clearing my house." "Dad's house." Melissa closed her eyes. Justin's face changed, but the words were already in the room. Frances nodded once. "Good night, Justin." He wanted to apologize. He also wanted the sale to move forward. The second desire was stronger. Melissa touched Frances's shoulder before leaving. Frances didn't pull away, but she didn't turn toward her either. When the door shut, Frances locked it. She opened the suitcase and took out the photograph. There was no proper place for it, so she set it beside the coffee machine. Across town, David Hughes was finishing the day's paperwork when he found Harold's overcoat draped over a chair in the personal effects room. A yellow tag was pinned to the sleeve. "Donate or discard," it read. Below that, in Justin's handwriting, were the words, "Nobody wants it." David removed the tag, checked the family contact sheet, and called the Birchwood Street number. Nobody answered. He left no message. Funeral homes collected things people forgot. Gloves, tie clips, eyeglasses, wedding rings removed before cremation, shoes brought in the wrong size. David had a policy about personal belongings. Nothing was donated until every reasonable effort had been made to return it. He lifted Harold's overcoat from the chair. It was heavier than it looked. The lower lining sagged, and one cuff felt unusually firm beneath his fingers, though David thought it was only an old repair. He hung the coat in the locked storage closet and wrote Frances Dean's name on a fresh tag. At the motor lodge, Frances lay fully dressed on top of the blanket, listening to the heater switch on and off. She believed the coat was still at the funeral home. She believed it was the last thing of Harold's that his children hadn't divided, boxed, or thrown away. What she didn't know was why Harold had cared so much about an old wool overcoat, or why, 2 years before his death, he'd asked a tailor to strengthen places that had never needed strengthening before. The next morning, she asked the desk clerk for 3 sheets of motel stationery and an envelope. She sat at the little table beneath the window and made a list. Clothes came first. 2 winter sweaters, 4 blouses, her black slacks, underwear, socks, boots, and the blue housecoat Melissa had carried into the hall. Then she wrote down her mother's sewing tin, the green medical notebook, her personal papers, the county fair photograph already beside the coffee machine, and the cedar box containing letters from her sister. She didn't list furniture. There was no place to put it. She didn't ask for dishes, though most of them had been wedding gifts to her and Harold. She kept the list to things nobody could reasonably mistake for part of Harold's estate. At the bottom, she wrote, "Harold's charcoal wool overcoat." The desk clerk let her use the office copier. Frances made 2 copies, placed the original in her handbag, and folded one into the envelope. Then she called Justin. He answered on the 5th ring. There were voices behind him and the hollow sound of an emptying room. "What is it?" he asked. "I made a list of my personal belongings. We already packed your clothes. You packed what fit. I told you we'd talk today. We're talking now. I'll come by at 10. The movers are here." "I know." Justin lowered his voice. "This isn't a good time. It's the only time. Once the boxes leave, I won't know where anything went." There was a pause. "All right," he said. 10. Frances hung up before he could change the arrangement. The lodge had a courtesy van used mostly for airport trips and medical appointments. Bottineau had no commercial airport nearby, but the owner kept the faded sign on the van because it looked official. The desk clerk said the driver could take Frances to Birchwood Street if she didn't mind waiting for a pharmacy pickup afterward. At 10 minutes past 10, she stepped out in front of the house. The driveway was crowded with vehicles. A moving truck stood with its rear door open. Two men carried the dining table through the front entrance sideways, while Justin directed them from the porch. He looked annoyed when he saw her, but he let her inside. The house had changed in one night. Pictures were gone from the walls. The living room rug had been rolled and tied. Harold's chair sat near the door, with a paper label taped to its back. Frances read the label. Justin. Rhonda was in the kitchen packing glassware. She gave Frances a tired glance. We put your boxes in the downstairs bedroom. Thank you. There are 6. There should be more than 6. Rhonda set a drinking glass into a carton. We didn't keep your old magazines or cleaning supplies. I don't want cleaning supplies. Frances handed Justin the list. He read it while walking. What cedar box? It was in the top of the hall closet. I haven't seen it. Then we'll look. The downstairs bedroom had been Harold's during his last years. His hospital bed was gone. So was the small table where Frances had arranged his pills each morning. 6 boxes stood along one wall, each marked Frances in black ink. She opened them one by one. The clothes were there, though unfolded now. So were her robe, spare shoes, toiletries, and a stack of old towels she hadn't requested. The 4th box held framed photographs. The 5th had books. The 6th contained kitchen items, including a dented roasting pan Rhonda apparently considered Frances's. The green notebook wasn't there. My medical notebook is missing, Frances said. Justin stood in the doorway. Why do you need that? Because it belongs to me. It's Dad's medical information. I wrote it, then write another one. Frances looked at him until he shifted his weight. The notebook wasn't financially valuable. That was exactly why his refusal hurt. He could have handed it over without losing anything. She walked to the kitchen. Rhonda was sealing a carton. Where are Harold's medical papers? Probably in the office pile. I need my green notebook. Rhonda looked toward Justin. It's just a notebook. It has Dad's appointments in it, Justin said. It has grocery lists in it, Frances said. It has the times I gave him his medicine. It has what he ate when he was too sick to eat. You didn't write any of it. The movers continued around them. One man waited by the doorway holding a floor lamp. Rhonda wiped her hands on her pants. Give it to her, Justin. He said nothing. Give it to her, Rhonda repeated. Justin went into the den. He returned with the notebook and placed it on the kitchen counter. Frances picked it up. A rubber band held the covers shut. Harold's last recorded blood pressure was written on the final page. She slipped the notebook into her handbag. The cedar box is in the hall closet, Rhonda said. They found it behind 2 folded blankets. Frances checked the contents before carrying it downstairs. The letters were still tied with the green ribbon she remembered. She went through every item on her list. Her mother's sewing tin had already been placed in a donation carton. She took it out. One sweater was missing. Rhonda found it beneath a pile of coats. The overcoat wasn't there. Justin called the funeral home, Rhonda said. Frances turned to him. You said you'd take care of it. I did. What did David say? Justin looked toward the moving truck. He wasn't available. I left instructions. What instructions? It's an old coat, Frances. What instructions? He rubbed the back of his neck. That they could donate whatever we didn't pick up. You told him nobody wanted it. Nobody did. I told you I wanted it. You said you wanted something that smelled like Dad. Half the clothes in this house smell like Dad. They aren't yours to choose for me. The mover with the lamp was still waiting. Justin waved him through and stepped closer to Frances. You need to understand something, he said. There's a whole house here. Rhonda and I can't stop over every shirt and coffee cup because you attach a memory to it. I'm not asking you to stop. I'm asking you not to dispose of the one thing I named. Melissa came in from the garage carrying a box of tools. She looked from Justin to Frances and understood enough. I'll call the funeral home, she said. I'll call them myself, Frances replied. That was the decision she carried out of the house. It was a small one, but it belonged entirely to her. Justin had spent the morning deciding what counted. The will decided what had monetary value. Rhonda decided which family memories belonged to whom. Even the motel had been chosen for Frances before she arrived. She couldn't undo any of that day. She could stop waiting for somebody else to make one telephone call. The moving company agreed to place her 6 boxes in a storage unit near the highway. Frances paid for the smallest unit they had. She kept the cedar box, sewing tin, notebook, and one additional bag with her. Back at the lodge, she called Hugh's funeral home. David answered. "This is Francis Dean." His voice softened. "Mrs. Dean. I was hoping to reach you. I'm no longer at the Birchwood number." I gathered that. She sat on the edge of the bed. "Do you still have Harold's overcoat?" "I do." "Justin told you to donate it. He left that instruction with my assistant." "I haven't donated anything." Frances closed her eyes. The coat still existed. That shouldn't have felt like a rescue, but it did. "I want it," she said. "Then it's yours. Can I collect it today? I'm at 2 services this afternoon. Tomorrow may be difficult as well." "Where are you staying?" she told him. "I'll bring it out," he said. "You don't have to do that." "I know." Frances thanked him. Before ending the call, David said, "There was a tag on the sleeve. It said nobody wanted it. I thought you should know that before I remove it. I already know." She looked at the suitcase on the floor. "Leave the tag," she said. David hesitated. "All right, I want to see it." 3 days at the lodge became 10. Frances negotiated a weekly rate and moved to a quieter room at the back, where delivery trucks wouldn't wake her before sunrise. Her Social Security deposit was still more than a week away. She counted what remained in her checking account and allowed herself a fixed amount each day. Breakfast came from the motel lobby. Lunch was usually soup. For dinner, she bought bread, cheese, and apples from a nearby market. She didn't tell Justin she had extended her stay. He called twice and left messages about forwarding mail. Rhonda called once to ask whether Frances had found an apartment. Frances hadn't. There were listings, but each required a deposit. One landlord wanted the first and last month's rent. Another place was above a bar and reached by an outdoor metal staircase that still had ice on it. Frances could manage stairs, but she knew what an April freeze would do to that landing. She began visiting the public library every afternoon. It was warm, quiet, and within walking distance. She used a computer to search rentals and wrote every address in the back of the green notebook. The librarian helped her print a bank statement. That was how Frances confirmed that the larger savings account was gone from her online access. Her name had never been on it, though Harold had referred to it for years as their emergency money. At Ernest Harvey's office, she asked to see every account title. Ernest brought her into the same room where Harold had signed tax papers. He showed her the documents slowly. The house deed named Harold alone. The savings account named Harold alone. The vehicles were registered to Harold. "What about household expenses?" Frances asked. "I paid those from our checking. That account remains yours, with $612. Ernest's mouth tightened. He knew the number already. "Did Harold ever ask you to revise the will?" she asked. "Not through my office. That isn't what I asked." Ernest leaned back. He mentioned estate planning more than once. "I advised him to review the will after his health changed. And he said he had handled what needed handling." Frances stopped writing. "When did he say that?" "The last time was about 2 years ago. That would have been around the same period Harold took his overcoat to Gordon Richards for repair." Frances didn't make the connection then. There wasn't enough to connect. Harold had handled things badly all his life, from leaking faucets to insurance forms, and usually claimed the job was complete before it was. "What did you think he meant?" she asked. "I assumed he'd spoken to another attorney, or that he'd arranged beneficiary designations directly with a bank." "You didn't check?" "I couldn't check private accounts without his authorization. I reminded him what the will said. He told me he understood." Ernest folded his hands over the file. "I'm sorry, Frances. I truly am." She believed him. She also understood that his regret couldn't pay a deposit. "Make me a copy of every page with my name on it," she said. He did. By the 3rd week, David had tried twice to bring the coat. The first time Frances was at Ernest's office. The second time, a spring storm closed part of the road and delayed a funeral David was handling outside town. On a cold Thursday morning, a black station wagon pulled into the lodge parking lot. Frances saw it from her window. David stepped out carrying Harold's overcoat in a clear garment bag. The yellow tag remained pinned to one sleeve. He met Frances outside her room. "I'm sorry this took so long. You kept it. That's what matters." He handed her the coat carefully. Through the plastic, Frances could see the worn lapels and the pale mark near the left pocket where Harold had once spilled road salt. She opened the zipper on the garment bag. The smell was faint. Wool, cedar, and the soap Harold used. She pressed her fingers against the collar, then let her hand fall. David pretended to examine the parking lot. After a moment, he said, "There's something odd about the lining." Frances looked up. "I noticed it when I moved the coat into storage. One side feels stiffer than the other. From a repair? Maybe. I didn't examine it beyond that." She ran her hand inside the coat. The satin lining had been replaced in sections over the years. Near the lower inner seam, the fabric felt thick beneath her fingertips. "Harold took it to Gordon Richards," she said. "That would make sense." David removed the yellow tag and offered it to her. Frances read Justin's writing again. "Nobody wants it." She folded the tag once and placed it in the outer pocket. "Thank you for bringing this. I'm glad I didn't throw it away." "So am I." After he left, Frances carried the coat inside and hung it on the bathroom door. The shoulders were too broad for her. The sleeves would cover most of her hands. She could have put it in the storage unit. She could have left it hanging as it was, a shape from Harold's life that served no purpose except to hurt when she looked at it. Instead, she decided to make it wearable. The choice surprised her. Harold had always believed good clothing should be used. He disliked garments saved for occasions that never came. Frances called Richards alterations. Gordon answered in the distracted tone of a man working with pins in his mouth. When she gave her name, he removed them. "I heard about Harold," he said. "I'm sorry, thank you. He was a good customer, terrible about collecting things on time." "That sounds like him. What can I do for you?" "I have his wool overcoat. I'd like it altered to fit me." There was a pause. "That's a fair amount of work." "I know. Bring it in. We'll look." The shop occupied a narrow storefront on Main Street between a tax service and an empty bakery. Frances carried the overcoat there the following afternoon. Gordon was 68, with silver hair combed straight back and a measuring tape hanging around his neck. He'd mended Harold's clothes for 30 years. He remembered every ripped pocket, loose button, and trouser hem Harold had insisted wasn't uneven. He spread the overcoat across his work table. "This is a good coat," he said. That's what Harold said. He'd want it used. Gordon checked the shoulders and seams. He measured Frances, wrote the figures on a paper pad, and turned the coat inside out. When he reached the lower lining, his fingers slowed. "What?" Frances asked. "This section." He pressed it between his thumb and forefinger. "I remember repairing the cuff. I remember reinforcing part of the inside. But this isn't sitting right." David noticed stiffness. "It's not interfacing. Too narrow." Gordon moved beneath the work lamp. He traced a line of tiny stitches running several inches along the inner seam. "These are mine," he said. "Harold asked me to close this by hand." "What was wrong with it?" "That's the thing. Nothing." Frances stepped closer. Gordon remembered Harold standing beside the same table 2 years earlier. Harold had watched every stitch. He'd paid cash, refused a receipt, and told Gordon the repair needed to hold even if the coat spent years in a closet. At the time, Gordon thought an ill man was being particular. Now he reached for a seam ripper. "Do I have your permission?" he asked. Frances looked at the yellow tag showing through the outer pocket. Then she looked at the seam Harold had paid to close. Yes. Gordon cut 3 stitches and eased the lining apart. A folded piece of paper had been pushed deep into the narrow space. He drew it out with tweezers and placed it on the table. The paper was old but not fragile. One side carried part of a legal description, torn through the middle. Frances could make out the words property deed and Bottineau County. Beneath them was part of Harold's signature. A smaller note had been folded inside it. Frances recognized Harold's blocky handwriting before Gordon opened it. There were only 2 words and a telephone number. Albert Pham. Gordon looked at her. "Do you know him?" Frances shook her head. She read the name again, then copied the telephone number into her green notebook. For the first time since the funeral, the problem in front of her wasn't something Justin had decided, or something an old will had taken away. Harold had placed this problem in her hands himself. She didn't know what the torn paper meant. She only knew it hadn't found its way into that seam by accident. "Don't open anything else yet," she said. Gordon set down the seam ripper. Frances folded the fragment exactly as they'd found it and placed it in an envelope from his desk. "I'm calling Albert Pham first thing tomorrow." At 8:30 the next morning, Frances dialed the number. A receptionist answered, asked her name, and put her on hold. Frances stood beside the motel window, with Gordon's envelope tucked under her arm. Albert came on the line less than a minute later. Mrs. Dean, how did you get this number? It was inside my husband's coat. There was a silence long enough for Francis to hear somebody close a door on his end. Is Harold with you? Harold died 3 weeks ago. Albert breathed out slowly. I'm very sorry. Did you know him? Yes. How? This isn't a conversation we should have by telephone. Can you come to my office? I don't have a car. Where are you? She gave him the name of the lodge. I'll send a cab, he said. Albert's office was above a pharmacy on Thompson Street. The stairwell smelled faintly of dust and peppermint. A small elevator took Frances to the second floor, where the receptionist met her and asked for identification. Albert came into the waiting room himself. He was 59, compactly built, with rimless glasses and a dark blue tie. His expression changed when he saw the envelope in Frances's hand. Please come in. His office was neat without feeling unused. A ceramic mug held sharpened pencils. 3 file cabinets stood against one wall, each with a lock. Frances sat across from him and removed the torn paper. Albert didn't touch it at first. May I? She nodded. He unfolded the deed fragment and studied the partial legal description. Then he read Harold's note. This is his handwriting, he said. I know. Where exactly was it? Sewn inside the lining. And the coat came to you from where? The funeral home. His children told them to donate it. Albert looked up. Harold's children, Justin and Rhonda? He folded the paper along its existing crease. Did they examine the coat? I don't think so. Do they know about this? No. Albert rose, locked his office door, and went to the nearest file cabinet. He opened the bottom drawer with a key from his pocket. Frances watched him pull out a thick folder secured with a red band. She could see Harold's name on the label, but Albert kept the folder angled away when he returned to the desk. Harold hired me in 2015, he said. He asked me to prepare a private trust. Frances sat very still. A trust for what? I can't disclose the contents until I establish that the release conditions have been met. I'm his wife. I understand. I found his note, and that's why we're speaking. Albert rested both hands on the closed folder. Harold was unusually specific. He wanted the arrangement kept separate from his will, an ordinary estate file. He also wanted the beneficiary to prove possession of an object he retained. What object? A small numbered key. Frances thought of every key she'd seen while packing Harold's belongings. House keys, vehicle keys, a padlock key for the shed. Justin had taken the vehicle ring. The house key she'd left on the table belonged to her. What does it open? A safe deposit box. Which bank? I can't give you that until the key is produced. Her patience thinned. You keep telling me what you can't say. I know how that sounds. Do you? Albert leaned forward. Harold designed the instructions this way. Not me. He believed the correct person would arrive with 2 things. Proof of his death and the key. The fragment you found establishes that he meant you to contact me, but it doesn't replace either requirement. What proof do you need? A certified death certificate. The funeral home has those. Good. Bring one with the key. And if I can't find the key... Albert glanced at the red-banded file. Then we may need a court order. That would make the entire process slower and far less private. How slow? Months, possibly longer if somebody objects. Frances thought of Justin clearing the house before the ground over Harold's grave had settled. Somebody will object, she said. Albert didn't disagree. He made a copy of the fragment, then returned the original to her. Before she put it away, he pointed to the torn edge. This was once part of a larger copy. Do you have the rest? Not here, in the box. Albert's face gave her nothing. Find the key, he said. Frances called David from Albert's office and requested a certified copy of the death certificate. David said he had several prepared for the family, but Justin had collected them. Can you issue another? Yes. I'll need your identification and signature. I'll come today. Albert arranged for the cab to stop at the funeral home before returning her to the lodge. He also asked her to sign a short statement describing how she received the coat and how Gordon found the papers. Why do you need that? Because dates and custody matter. If this becomes disputed, people will ask who held the coat and when. Disputed by whom? Anyone who believes the trust contains something they should have received. For the first time, Frances understood that finding Harold's message hadn't only opened a possibility, It had opened another argument. She signed the statement. Albert made 3 copies. One went into Harold's file. One went to Francis. He placed the third in a separate envelope. "Who gets that one?" she asked. "Ernest Harvey. I have to notify the estate attorney that a separate trust matter may exist. Do you have to tell him what's in it?" "Not yet. He'll tell Justin. He represents the estate. I can't ask him to keep the existence of a possible claim from the personal representatives." Francis didn't know Justin and Rhonda had already been named to handle Harold's estate. Nobody had explained that part after the will reading. What claim? Albert shook his head. That was imprecise. The trust isn't necessarily making a claim against the estate. It may stand entirely apart. But until I see the complete document from the box, I won't promise what I can't prove. That answer stayed with her through the trip to the funeral home. David met her in the same room where Ernest had read the will. He checked her identification and brought out a certified death certificate in a large envelope. Harold's life had been reduced to printed fields: name, birthplace, marital status, date of death. Francis checked each line. Under surviving spouse, her own name appeared. It was the first official document she'd seen since the funeral that admitted she existed as more than an identifying detail. David watched her place it beside Albert's statement. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "I don't know yet. Is this about the coat?" She looked at him. He raised one hand. "You don't have to tell me." There was paper inside the lining. David absorbed that without asking what it said. "I'm going back to Gordon's," Francis said. "There may be a key." The cuff felt stiff. "You noticed that before?" "Yes." "Did you tell anyone else?" "No." "Please don't." "I won't." At the lodge, Francis put the death certificate and deed fragment into the cedar box. She locked it with the tiny key her mother had kept tied to the handle. Then she called Gordon. He offered to collect her after lunch. Before he arrived, Justin called. Francis stared at his name on the motel telephone display before answering. "What did you take from Dad's coat?" he asked. The speed of it surprised her, though it shouldn't have. Ernest had received Albert's notice and called Justin within the hour. "A piece of paper." "What kind of paper?" "I don't know yet." "Ernest says another lawyer contacted him about a trust." "That's what I was told." "What trust?" "I don't know." Justin's voice sharpened. "You went to an attorney without telling us. You put me in a motel without telling me. That isn't the same thing." "No, it isn't." She heard Melissa speaking near him. Justin covered the mouthpiece, but not well enough. "What does she want?" Melissa asked. Francis waited. When Justin returned, his tone was calmer. "Anything found in Dad's belongings belongs to the estate until Ernest reviews it. The coat didn't belong to the estate when you told David to throw it away. That doesn't matter. It matters to me. I'm coming over." "No, we need to see the paper." "No." "Francis, don't make this difficult," she almost answered quickly. Then she remembered Albert explaining that dates and custody mattered. "The paper is secure," she said. "The attorney has a copy. You can speak to Ernest." "What attorney?" "Albert Fohm." Justin repeated the name to someone in the room. "Did Dad give him money?" "I don't know." "Did you?" "No." "Then what is this about?" "I don't know, Justin." That answer hasn't changed. He didn't believe her. It was easier for him to think Francis had concealed something than to accept that Harold might have concealed it from everyone. "Rhonda's on her way to Boatneau," he said. "We'll talk tonight. I'm busy tonight." "Doing what?" "Looking after my own affairs." She hung up. Her hands trembled afterward. She pressed them flat against the table until they stopped. Gordon arrived in an old green sedan with loose papers covering the back seat. He cleared a space for Francis's handbag and drove them to the shop. The overcoat remained on his work table. He hadn't altered it. "I figured we'd better understand the inside before changing the outside," he said. Francis showed him Albert's statement and explained only what he needed to know. "A numbered key," Gordon repeated, "small enough to hide." He turned the coat over. They searched it in order. First came the ordinary pockets. Gordon removed the yellow tag, an old handkerchief, 2 peppermints fused to their wrappers, and a parking receipt so faded they couldn't read the date. The breast pocket was empty. The lower seam held nothing else. Gordon opened the remaining stitches carefully and ran a thin wooden tool along the lining. "No second paper," he said. Francis checked the collar with her fingertips. Gordon examined the shoulder pads. They found loose thread, lint, and 1 straight pin, but no key. After nearly an hour, he laid the coat flat. Maybe Harold kept it somewhere else. He did. Albert said the item was kept apart from the paperwork. I meant apart from the coat. Francis looked at the dark wool. If the key had been in the Birchwood house, it could be anywhere now. It might be in Justin's pocket with the vehicle keys. It might be taped beneath a desk already loaded onto a truck. It could be inside a donation box. The whole property had been cleared. Would Harold have hidden a bank key at home? Gordon asked. He hid a deed in his coat. That's a fair answer. Francis picked up the yellow tag. Nobody wants it. She turned it over, though the back was blank. David said the cuff felt stiff. Gordon looked toward the right sleeve. He took it in both hands and bent the cuff gently. It resisted. I reinforced this, he said. You remembered that yesterday. I remembered sewing it. I didn't remember why it needed this much structure. He carried the sleeve beneath the work lamp and examined the stitches. The outer cuff had ordinary wear. Inside, a narrow strip of matching wool had been sewn over the hem. The work was so neat it looked decorative. Gordon touched the seam. I did this in 2024. Harold told me he'd caught the cuff on a nail. There wasn't a tear. Francis watched his face. What did he ask you to do? He brought me the coat after closing time. He wanted a pocket inside the cuff, then changed his mind and said it should be sewn shut. With something inside? He didn't say. Did you see him put anything there? Gordon thought back. Harold had stood with his back partly turned, one hand cupped over the table. Gordon had gone into the rear room to find matching thread. When he returned, Harold was pressing the cuff flat. I may have, Gordon said. Francis placed the sleeve on the table. Justin and Rhonda already knew there was a trust. Whatever privacy she'd had was narrowing. If the key wasn't inside the cuff, she would have to go back through a house she no longer owned and ask permission to search things that had already been scattered. Open it, she said. Gordon slipped the seam ripper under the first stitch. This time, he cut only enough thread to insert 2 fingers beneath the strip of wool. Something clicked against his thimble. He drew out a small brass key attached to a flat metal tag. The number stamped into it matched the number Albert had written on Francis's statement. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then Gordon placed the key in Francis's palm. It was shorter than her house key and heavier than it looked. The tag bore a bank name on one side and the box number on the other. Do you want me to drive you to Albert's office? Gordon asked. Yes. He pinned the cuff closed so the loose fabric wouldn't tear. Francis put the coat on, though the sleeves still hung beyond her wrists. She tucked the envelope, death certificate, and brass key into her handbag. Albert was with a client when they arrived. His receptionist asked them to wait. Francis sat beside Gordon beneath a clock that ticked louder than it needed to. Every few minutes, she checked the clasp on her handbag. Gordon picked up a magazine, turned 2 pages, and put it down. Did Harold ever mention Albert? He asked quietly. No. A bank box? No. The lake? Francis turned toward him. What lake? Gordon shook his head. Nothing. I'm trying to guess. Don't. You're right. He folded his hands and watched the clock. Albert opened his office door 15 minutes later. His client left, and Albert called Francis inside. Gordon remained in the waiting room until Francis asked him to join them. He found the paper, she said. He found the key. He should hear what they lead to. Albert accepted that. Francis placed the certified death certificate on his desk. Then she set the key beside it. He examined the stamped number and compared it with the instructions in Harold's file. This is it, he said. Then tell me what it opens. A safe deposit box at Dakota Prairie Bank. And what's inside? I haven't seen the contents since Harold placed them there. You helped him? I witnessed the deposit. The box was leased through the trust. Albert opened the red-banded folder. This time, he turned it so Francis could see. The top page was titled Certification of Trust. Harold's name appeared as grantor. Albert's appeared as trustee. Francis's name was printed several lines lower. She leaned forward. Solely beneficiary, she read. Yes. Beneficiary of what? That answer should be in the box. Albert called the bank while she sat there. The branch manager asked him several questions, then scheduled access for that afternoon. Francis would need her identification, the death certificate, and the key. Albert would attend as trustee. Can Gordon come? Francis asked. Not into the vault room. He can wait outside. Gordon nodded. I've waited in worse places. They had nearly 2 hours before the appointment. Gordon took Francis to a diner near the courthouse. She ordered chicken soup. He ordered a roast beef sandwich, then gave her half without asking whether she wanted it. She ate because her hands had begun to feel light. Outside, thin snowmelt ran along the curb. March had given way to April without much sign of spring. Bottineau still held dirty banks of snow beside parking lots, but the roofs had begun to drip in the afternoon sun. "What do you think is in there?" Gordon asked. Francis tore the sandwich in half again. "Papers." "That's a safe guess." Harold liked papers. He kept furnace receipts for 12 years. He also hid one inside a coat. He never threw anything away. Gordon watched her. She knew what he was thinking. This was different. Harold hadn't misplaced the fragment. He'd arranged for it to be found by someone who understood that coat. The thought made Frances angry in a way she hadn't expected. "He could have told me," she said. "Maybe the papers explain why he didn't. Papers explain what people want them to explain." Gordon let that sit between them. At the bank, Albert met them near the entrance. He carried his trust file in a locked briefcase. The branch manager, a woman named Elaine Mercer, led Francis and Albert through a door behind the teller counter. Gordon stayed in the lobby with Harold's overcoat draped across his knees. The vault room was brighter than Francis expected. Rows of narrow metal doors covered 2 walls. Elaine checked the box number, inserted the bank's guard key, and stepped aside. Francis fitted Harold's brass key into the second lock. It turned smoothly. Elaine and Albert pulled out a long metal box and carried it into a private viewing room. Then Elaine left them alone. Francis stood over the box. "Do I open it?" she asked. "It belongs to the trust," Albert said. "You're the beneficiary." That wasn't an answer. "Yes. Open it." She raised the hinged lid. There was no cash inside. For one strange moment, she felt relieved. Bundles of hidden money would have made Harold seem like somebody she didn't know. The box contained a thick document envelope, a ring with 3 keys, a stack of photographs, and a white letter sealed with Francis's name on the front. Beneath those lay a property tax file and a blue folder marked Metigoshe Trail. Albert reached for the document envelope but stopped. "May I?" Francis handed it to him. He removed a certified copy of a trust deed. A recorder's stamp ran across the first page. The date was in October of 2015. Albert read silently until he reached the property description. Then he placed the paper flat on the table. "This is the complete document." Francis saw Harold's signature near the bottom. Albert's name appeared beneath it. A notary had stamped the page, and the county recording information filled the upper corner. "What property?" she asked. Albert opened the blue folder and took out a map. A lot had been outlined in red along Metigoshe Trail at Lake Metigoshe. Beside the map was an address Francis didn't recognize. "Harold transferred this property into the trust in 2015, Albert said. "The trust names you as sole beneficiary upon his death." "What property is on it?" "A chalet-style cabin." Francis looked at him. Harold didn't own a cabin. Albert turned the map around. He did. Gordon was brought into the room after the documents had been reviewed and the box closed. Elaine allowed them to use a small conference office near the lobby. Albert spread the trust deed on the table. Gordon read the address twice. "Lake Metigoshe," he said. "Yes," Albert replied. "How long did he have it?" "The earliest purchase papers in the box are from 2010. It appears he acquired the land and structure in stages, then placed the completed property into trust 5 years later." Francis opened the stack of photographs. The first showed a neglected building surrounded by tall weeds. It had a steep roof, a sagging porch, and dark timber crossing the front in the style of an old alpine cottage. 2 lower windows were boarded. The date printed on the back was from the summer of 2010. In the next photograph, part of the roof had been removed. Harold stood beside a pile of lumber, wearing work gloves and a cap Francis remembered losing around that same time. She stared at the picture. "He told me he was helping somebody repair a hunting cabin." Gordon studied Harold's younger face. Maybe he was. The later photographs showed gradual changes. A new roof, repaired stonework, larger windows facing the water, a porch with squared wooden posts. In one picture, Harold was painting trim, while a man Francis didn't know held the ladder. There were no photographs of Francis because she had never been there. She came to the most recent image. The chalet stood complete among tall pines. Snow lay across the roof and railings. Light glowed behind the windows. On the back, Harold had written a date from the previous winter. Francis set it down. He could hardly walk through the grocery store last winter. He may not have taken the photograph, Albert said. In the property file, they found tax receipts, insurance documents, utility bills, and a maintenance contract. Payments had been prepaid through the trust. The caretaker's name was Nathan Carrillo. His contract began in 2018 and ran for 8 years. He was responsible for heating checks, snow removal, minor repairs, and monthly inspections. A mailing address on Medigauche Trail appeared beside his signature. "Does he know Harold owned it?" Francis asked. Albert examined the contract. "Harold's name isn't here. My office was listed as the contact, but the payments came through a management account. Nathan may only know the trust. Why would Harold hide his own name?" "I don't know." Francis looked at the sealed letter. Albert had placed it separately from the legal papers. Her name remained untouched across the front. "Open that," Gordon said gently. "Not here." Albert glanced at the envelope. "That's your choice." She slipped it into her handbag. "What does this mean today?" she asked. Not in legal language. Albert brought the deed closer. "It means the Birchwood Street will doesn't control this property. Harold transferred the chalet to the trust in 2015. It wasn't his individual property when he died, so it never entered his probate estate. Justin and Rhonda don't inherit it. Not under these documents. Can they sell it? No. Can Ernest include it with the house? No. Can I live there? Albert checked the trust language once more. Yes. Frances rested her fingertips on the recorded deed. For weeks, she'd been measuring her future in motel nights. Now there was a house she'd never seen, held in a trust bearing her name. It didn't feel like ownership yet. It felt like hearing someone call from another room and not knowing whether the voice was real. Albert took a recent insurance appraisal from the file. The property had been valued at $430,000. Gordon gave a low whistle. Francis didn't. The number was too large to connect with the photograph of the first broken porch. It was also too large to remain private for long. "What happens next?" she asked. "I verify the current title status with the county. Then I notify Ernest that the trust property has been identified. Does he have to know the value? He'll learn it. And Justin, Ernest will tell him." Francis opened the file again and found the caretaker's address. "I want to see the chalet before they call me." Albert studied her. "That's reasonable, but take copies. Don't carry the originals." "Can we go today?" Gordon asked. It was nearly 4. Lake Medigauche wasn't far, but the smaller roads could still be icy after dark. Francis looked at the last photograph. Warm windows, deep snow, nobody visible. "Tomorrow morning," she said. Albert made certified copies of the trust deed and the page naming Francis as beneficiary. He returned the originals to the safe deposit box along with the early photographs and tax records. Francis kept the 3 property keys, Nathan's address, the recent photograph, and Harold's sealed letter. When they left the bank, Gordon carried the overcoat. Francis carried the blue folder against her chest. Justin was waiting at the motel. His pickup stood outside her room. Rhonda sat in the passenger seat. Melissa was in the back. Francis told Gordon to keep driving. "They've seen us," he said. "I know." Justin stepped into the parking lot and raised one hand. Gordon slowed. Francis looked at the 3 faces turned toward her. She'd sat beside them at Harold's funeral. She'd eaten holidays with them and remembered their birthdays. Now they were waiting outside a motel room that Justin had paid for 3 weeks earlier, expecting to question her about something their father had kept from all of them. "Stop near the office," she said. "Not by my door." Gordon parked where the desk clerk could see them through the lobby window. Francis got out with the folder. Justin walked toward her. Rhonda and Melissa followed. "What did you find?" he asked. "A trust. We know that." "A trust holding what?" "Property." Rhonda's eyes moved to the blue folder. "What property?" Francis hesitated only long enough to understand that withholding the fact would buy her a few hours at most. "A place at Lake Medigauche." Rhonda stopped walking. Justin stared at Francis. "Dad didn't have a place at the lake. That's what I thought." "Where?" "Medigauche Trail." "How much is it worth?" Melissa asked. Justin glanced at her, but the question had already reached Francis. $430,000. Nobody spoke. A truck passed on the highway behind them. Then Justin held out his hand for the folder. "I need to see those papers." Francis kept both hands around it. "No. If Dad bought it, it belongs to the estate. The recorded deed says it belongs to the trust." Who's the trust for? Me. Rhonda turned away. She walked several steps toward the pickup, then stopped with her back to them. Justin lowered his hand. Get Ernest on the phone, he told Melissa. Frances opened the motel office door. You can call whoever you need to call, she said. I'm going to see the property in the morning. Inside her room, she locked the deed copies in the cedar box. Then she sat beside the window until Justin's pickup left the parking lot. She didn't open Harold's letter. At 7 the next morning, Gordon arrived with coffee, 2 egg sandwiches, and the overcoat hanging behind the passenger seat. They took the highway north, then followed the road toward Lake Metigosha. Winter fields gave way to wooded rises. Patches of old snow remained beneath the trees. Frances held the property map in her lap. Every turn brought them closer to a place Harold had visited without her for 16 years. Near the lake, the pavement narrowed. Cabins appeared between the pines, some closed for the season, others with smoke rising from metal chimneys. They found Metigosha Trail and followed it around a bend. A wooden gate blocked the final drive. One of the keys from the safe deposit box opened the padlock. Gordon pushed the gate aside, and they continued through the trees. The chalet appeared gradually, first the steep roof, then the stone chimney, then the broad porch facing the water. It looked exactly like the recent photograph, except the windows were dark. A man in a brown work jacket came around the side carrying a snow shovel. He watched Gordon's car stop and didn't lower the shovel. "This is private property," he called. Frances stepped out with the copy deed in her hand. "Are you Nathan Carrillo?" "That depends who's asking." "Frances Dean." His expression didn't change. She crossed the packed snow slowly and showed him the trust document. "My husband arranged your contract." Nathan read Harold's name. Then he looked at her. "I was told the owner would contact me before the end of March. He couldn't." "Why not?" Frances glanced toward the chalet. Behind one of those dark windows, Harold had left a home she never knew existed. "He died 3 weeks ago," she said. Nathan lowered the shovel. For the first time since they arrived, he looked less suspicious than stunned. "You'd better come inside," he said. Nathan unlocked the front door and reached for a row of switches. 2 lamps came on in the main room. Their light fell across a stone fireplace, pine walls, and furniture covered with white cotton sheets. "It's been closed up since February," he said. "I keep the heat low and check it every Friday." The air smelled of cedar and cold ashes. Frances stepped inside. The main room faced the lake through 3 tall windows. A long wooden table stood near the kitchen. The floorboards were wide and dark, marked here and there by ordinary use. This wasn't an empty investment property. Somebody had chosen lamps, washed curtains, stocked shelves, and put a woven rug beside the front door. Nathan set the shovel against the wall. "I didn't know Mr. Dean's name," he said. "Albert's office called the owner North Shore Trust." "You never met Harold?" "Not knowingly. A man came around during the early restoration. Gray cap, talked too much about roof drainage." "That was Harold," Gordon said. Nathan looked at Frances. "He said he worked for the owner. He enjoyed that sort of thing." The lying, the roof drainage. Nathan accepted the correction. He crossed to the thermostat and frowned. This should be warmer. The furnace was running, but the vents gave off little heat. Nathan went into a utility room behind the kitchen. Gordon followed him. Frances remained in the main room. A framed map of Lake Metigosha hung above a writing desk. Several routes had been marked lightly in pencil. One line followed the road back toward Bottineau. She ran her fingertips along the desk. There was no dust. From the utility room came the sound of a metal panel being removed. "Blower belt slipping," Nathan called. "Do you have another?" Gordon asked. "In the shed." Nathan went outside. Frances carried Harold's overcoat to the fireplace and laid it across a chair. Then she removed the sealed letter from her handbag. She waited until Gordon returned from the utility room. "I'm going to read this. Do you want me to leave?" "No. Sit down." He lowered himself onto the sofa. Frances took the chair beside the cold fireplace. The envelope opened easily beneath her finger. Inside were 4 sheets written in Harold's hand. The letters grew less even near the end, but they were clear. "Frances," she read aloud, then stopped. Gordon looked toward the windows. She began again. "Frances, if Albert gave you this, then you found the coat and the key. I'm sorry I made you work so hard for something I should have placed in your hands." She read the next line silently. Harold wrote that he bought the old chalet in 2010. The building had been cheap because the roof leaked and part of the foundation had shifted. He repaired it over several summers with hired help. Francis had believed he was doing occasional work for a man from Minot. He let me think he was earning extra money, she said. Gordon didn't defend him. Harold explained that the Birchwood Street house had always been a wound between his first family and his second. After the divorce from Carol, he promised Rhonda and Justin that the home they remembered would remain theirs. When he married Frances, he made the 1999 will to keep that promise. Years passed. The old promise stayed on paper, while Frances built a life inside the house. Harold knew the arrangement had become unfair. He also knew that changing the will would bring the argument into the open. He feared Justin would say Frances had replaced the family, and Rhonda would believe the last piece of her parents' marriage had been taken. So he chose a separate solution. The trust protected the chalet from the will and from the fights he expected after his death. He recorded it in 2015, while his health was good. He hired Nathan in 2018 because the place needed to remain ready even when Harold could no longer travel there. Frances reached the final page. "You spent your life taking care of what everyone else left for you," Harold had written. "My house, my meals, my appointments, my bad days, and all the people who arrived expecting you to make room. I built this because I knew one day my children might look at Birchwood and see only what I promised them. I didn't want you left holding nothing again." Frances lowered the page. Again. That word belonged to a part of her life Harold rarely mentioned. Before she married him, Frances had cared for her mother through a long illness. When her mother died, the rented house went back to its owner. Frances left with clothing, a sewing tin, and the cedar box. Harold had helped her carry them. He remembered the shape of that departure. He'd built the chalet so it wouldn't happen twice. It happened twice anyway. The motel room, the suitcase, the missing sweater, and Justin asking what she wanted from Harold's coat had all happened, despite Harold's planning. Frances continued reading. "I should have told you. I kept thinking I'd take you there when it was finished. Then I kept finding one more thing to repair. After my heart went bad, secrecy had become a habit, and I was ashamed to explain how long I'd kept it. That was cowardice, not wisdom." Gordon rubbed his thumb along one knuckle. Harold's last instructions were practical. The taxes were paid through the year. A reserve account covered Nathan's final, contracted months and necessary repairs. Frances could live there, sell it, or continue the trust. The choice was hers alone. He asked her not to confuse the hidden manner of the gift with uncertainty about who should receive it. She folded the pages and returned them to the envelope. "He knew," she said. "Yes, he knew what they might do. He suspected. And he still left me in that room with the old will." Gordon didn't answer. There was affection in Harold's letter. There was also an admission that he had placed the burden of discovery on the person already carrying the loss. Frances was grateful for the chalet. She was angry with him for making gratitude so complicated. Nathan returned with the belt. He and Gordon replaced it together. The furnace began pushing warm air through the vents. Nathan washed his hands at the kitchen sink, then opened a cabinet beneath the writing desk. "I should show you these." Inside were 8 binders, each labeled by year. The first began in 2018. Every visit had been recorded. Furnace checks, roof inspections, plumbing repairs, fuel deliveries, snow removal, and photographs of completed work. Each month ended with a payment entry from the management account. "Albert's office sent the money every January," Nathan said. "I invoiced against it. Anything left rolled into the next year." Frances turned through the most recent binder. The entries continued through the week before Harold's death. Nathan had checked the boiler, cleared the chimney cap, and replaced a cracked kitchen tile. "You did all this without knowing who it was for?" "I knew somebody cared whether it lasted." He looked around the room. That was enough for the contract. A vehicle sounded on the drive. Nathan went to the window. More visitors? Frances saw Justin's pickup stop behind Gordon's car. Melissa got out first. Rhonda followed. Justin looked toward the chalet and then across the lake, measuring both. "How did they find us?" Gordon asked. "Ernest has the property description now," Frances said. Nathan reached for the door. "I can tell them to leave." "No, let them come in." She placed Harold's letter inside her handbag. Justin entered without removing his boots. Melissa wiped hers on the rug. Rhonda stopped just inside the main room. She knew the lake through older memories. Carol and Harold had rented cabins there when she and Justin were young. Those summers had ended with the divorce. The smell of cedar brought them back before she could prepare herself. "So this is it," Justin said. "This is it," Francis replied. He turned slowly, taking in the stonework and windows. 430,000? That's the recent appraisal. Ernest says the trust can be challenged. Albert says it was recorded. That doesn't mean Dad understood what he signed. He signed it in 2015. Justin didn't respond to the date. He had hoped the trust was recent, something created while Harold was weak and Francis controlled his appointments. Melissa stepped closer to him. "We're not here to fight," she said. Gordon looked at their unannounced arrival and decided not to answer. Rhonda walked to the lake windows. "Dad brought us here," she said. "Not this house. A rental farther down." Francis waited. Rhonda turned. "He knew what this place meant to us. He built it years after you were grown. That isn't the point." "What is the point?" Rhonda pressed her lips together. Her divorce had left her in a small apartment outside Minot. The medical supply office where she worked had closed after a merger. She had savings, but they were thinning. Selling Birchwood Street would give her time to start again. Then the chalet appeared, tied to the same lake where she remembered her parents together. It felt to her like proof that Harold had taken an old family place and rebuilt it for Francis. "I lost my home too," she said. Francis understood the sentence. She didn't accept the claim hidden inside it. "You're selling the house on Birchwood, my childhood home. The home I lived in for 28 years. Rhonda looked away. Justin opened one of the kitchen cabinets. "Is there a mortgage?" "No," Francis said. "That helps." "Helps what?" "A sale." "I'm not selling it. You haven't even spent one night here. I don't need to." Justin shut the cabinet. "My business is carrying debt," he said. "The last 2 years were bad. I've got a loan coming due, and the Birchwood money won't cover everything once it's split." Melissa's face changed. She hadn't expected him to say it plainly. "How much debt?" Francis asked. "That's private. You came into my house to plan a sale. It stopped being private." Justin looked at Melissa. She answered for him. "If he can't pay the note this summer, the bank can take the equipment, maybe the building too." There it was. Justin didn't want the chalet because Harold had loved the lake. He needed its value to keep his business from failing. The will had given him an asset, but not enough to solve the problem he'd concealed. Rhonda wanted security after her marriage, and job disappeared. She also wanted compensation for an older loss Francis hadn't caused. Melissa wanted the debt gone before it took their own house with it. Each of them had arrived carrying fear. Together, they called that fear a family right. Justin pulled out a chair at the table. "We can settle this without spending money on lawyers," he said. "Sell the chalet. Split the proceeds 3 ways. You'd have more than enough for an apartment." Francis looked around the room Harold had spent 16 years restoring. "You gave me a motel room for 3 nights. That was handled badly. You told David to throw away the coat. I didn't know what was in it. That's the trouble, Justin. You only want what you know has value." Rhonda turned from the window. "We're asking for a fair discussion." "No. You're asking me to give away 2/3 before I've slept here once." Nobody spoke. Nathan closed the maintenance binder and placed it beneath his hand. Francis looked at Justin. "You can talk to Ernest. I'll talk to Albert. Until then, you don't enter this property unless I invite you." Justin stood. "You're choosing a cabin over the family. I'm choosing not to decide under pressure." He wanted to push further, but the binders on the desk, Nathan beside them, and Gordon near the door, made the room feel less available to him. Rhonda left first. Melissa followed. At the door, Justin turned back. "There's a deadline for challenging this. Ernest checking it now, then check it." After the pickup disappeared beyond the gate, Francis carried Harold's overcoat upstairs. She chose the bedroom facing the lake, opened the suitcase Gordon had brought from the motel, and set it on a wooden bench. For the first time since Birchwood Street, nobody was waiting for her to leave. She left it open. The suitcase held very little, but shutting it felt too much like preparing to go. Nathan turned on the water and checked every faucet. The kitchen tap coughed air, then ran brown for several seconds before clearing. Gordon found clean sheets in a linen closet and helped Francis make the bed. By evening, the furnace had warmed the upper floor. Gordon offered to stay on the sofa. "I've slept alone before," Francis said. "I know. Nathan's house is just down the trail. I know that too. You want to stay because you think Justin will come back." Gordon looked toward the front windows. "Do you?" "No, he'll call a lawyer first." That answer was enough for both of them. Gordon left before dark. Nathan gave Frances his telephone number and showed her where Harold had kept a flashlight, spare batteries, and the main water shutoff. "If the furnace stops, call me," he said. "If you smell propane, go outside first and call from there. I know how furnaces work. I'm sure you do. You're used to giving instructions. I'm paid to worry about empty houses. This one isn't empty now." Nathan looked around as if he needed to adjust to that fact. "No," he said, "it isn't." After he left, Frances heated soup in the kitchen. She ate at the long table with Harold's letter beside her plate. The chalet made ordinary noises. Pipes clicked inside the walls. Wind moved through the pines. Something small ran across the porch roof and disappeared. Frances washed her bowl and left it in the drying rack. Then she walked through every room. There were 2 bedrooms upstairs and 1 smaller room on the main floor. Harold had installed a wide shower with a built-in bench. The doorways were broad. Light switches sat slightly lower than usual. He'd planned for somebody growing older. In the writing desk, she found blank stationery, stamps, and a drawer filled with instruction manuals. Harold had written the purchase date on each cover. Nothing else was hidden. Frances was glad of that. She didn't want the rest of her future delivered through seams and locked boxes. The next morning, Albert called before breakfast. "Did you send them?" "I sent the recorded deed and certification. Those are public or properly disclosable. I didn't send Harold's letter. What did Ernest say? Justin and Rhonda intend to challenge the trust." "On what ground?" "They're considering undue influence and lack of capacity." Frances looked through the window at the lake. Harold signed it 5 years before his diagnosis. "That's important. We need to prove it cleanly. The date is stamped on the deed. They may argue the document was recorded later than it was signed, altered, replaced, or connected to an arrangement Harold didn't understand. Do they have evidence? Not that I've seen. Then why should I prove what they only imagined? Because the trust is worth $430,000, and they have 90 days to object after formal disclosure. People with that much at stake rarely stop because the first answer is no. Frances carried the telephone to the table. "What do you need from me?" "Permission to hire a title examiner, Patricia Dixon. She'll trace the property from Harold's purchase through the trust recording and check for later transfers or liens." "How much?" "The trust reserve can pay her fee. Hire her." Albert paused. "I also want statements from Gordon, David, and Nathan. About the coat, about dates. Gordon can establish when Harold altered it. David can establish how it returned to you. Nathan can document years of maintenance paid through the trust." Frances took the green notebook from her handbag. "Tell me exactly what each person needs to write." For the next 3 days, she gathered facts. She didn't ask anyone to describe Harold as generous, loving, or mentally sound. Albert said broad opinions were easy to attack. Dates, invoices, signatures, and first-hand actions were stronger. Gordon found his alteration book from 2024. Harold's name appeared beside a cash entry in May. The description read, "Reinforced inner seam and cuff." Gordon had written the unusual request because it wasn't a standard repair. He signed a statement explaining that Harold arrived alone, described the work clearly, paid the correct amount, and returned to collect the coat himself. Gordon also described finding the deed fragment with Frances's permission. "I wish I'd written more," he said. "You wrote enough to remember the day." David produced the funeral home property log. It showed when the overcoat arrived, when Justin directed that it be donated, and when David held it back. His delivery to Frances was recorded with the motel address and date. He attached a copy of the yellow tag. "I nearly threw this away after I handed you the coat," Frances told him. "I nearly removed it before bringing it, but neither of us did." Nathan brought the maintenance binders to the chalet's dining table. Albert came out to inspect them. The prepaid contract began in January of 2018. Bank records showed annual transfers from the trust management account. Nathan's invoices matched those transfers month by month. Albert opened the binder from the first year. "You met the man you now believe was Harold." "Several times," Nathan said. "He checked the work, but he never identified himself as owner." "How did he seem? Particular? Confused?" "No." "Did he tell you what the property was for?" Nathan thought. "Once he said, 'A house should be ready before the person needs it.'" "I assumed he meant a renter." Albert wrote that down. Frances was standing at the kitchen counter. She stopped drying a cup, but didn't turn. That sentence wasn't proof of ownership. It was proof Harold had known exactly what he was building. Patricia arrived the following Monday with a laptop, a portable scanner, and 2 canvas file bags. She was 47 and spoke quickly until she reached a document. Then she slowed down. "I don't authenticate intentions," she told Francis. "I authenticate the public trail. That's what I need." They met at Albert's office before going to the county recorder's office. Patricia began with Harold's purchase in 2010. The original deed described a rundown cabin and adjoining parcel. A later boundary adjustment added a narrow strip near the water. In October of 2015, Harold conveyed the full property into the private trust Albert had drafted. The recorder indexed the transfer under Harold's name, the trust's name, the legal description, and the instrument number. Patricia compared the original county scan with the certified trust deed from the safe deposit box. "Same instrument," she said. "Same page count, same signatures, no substitutions." "Could it have been created later and given an older date?" Francis asked. "No. The county received and scanned it in 2015. The index entry was included in that day's recording batch. There are fee records and a sequential instrument number." Albert looked toward Francis. "That's the clean proof," Patricia continued. There had been no later deed removing the chalet from the trust. No mortgage had been placed against it. No judgment lien appeared under Harold, the trust, or Albert as trustee. Property taxes were current. She searched Harold's name again to make sure there wasn't a second lake property creating confusion. There wasn't. By late afternoon, Patricia had traced 16 years of title history and 11 years of trust ownership. She prepared a formal report. The first page stated the conclusion in ordinary language. The Lake Metagauche property had been validly transferred into the trust in 2015 and remained trust property on the date of Harold's death. Francis read the sentence twice. "So, the will never touched it." "That's correct," Patricia said. "Harold didn't personally own the chalet when he died. The trust did. And the trust names me as sole beneficiary." Albert turned to Patricia. "Address capacity and timing in the supplemental section." Patricia nodded. "I'll include the recording dates. Medical capacity isn't my field." "It doesn't need to be," Francis said. "His diagnosis came in 2020. Patricia looked at her notes. 5 years after the transfer? Yes. That difference mattered more than Francis had first understood. Justin's argument required a sick man near death, dependent on his wife, and signing whatever she placed in front of him. The county record showed Harold acting years before the terminal diagnosis. He'd acted without Francis knowing anything about it. She couldn't have pressured him into creating something she didn't know existed. Albert assembled the documents in a portable file case. The recorded trust deed came first. Then Patricia's report, the purchase records, Nathan's contract and payment history, Gordon's alteration entry, David's property log, and Harold's letter. "Keep the original letter with you," Albert said. "I'll use a copy unless the court asks for the original." "Will there be a court?" Ernest filed notice this morning that Justin and Rhonda intend to object before the 90-day period closes. Intend to, or did? Intend to. He asked for a meeting first. To settle? To see whether you'll agree to sell. Francis closed the file case. They already asked. Now they'll ask through counsel. When? Thursday at Ernest's office. Gordon drove her back to the chalet that evening. The overcoat hung behind them, its cuff still open where the brass key had been removed. At the dining table, Francis arranged copies of every document by date. The dates told the story without asking anyone to believe a feeling. Harold bought the cabin in 2010. He recorded the trust in 2015. He hired Nathan in 2018. His diagnosis came in 2020. He altered the coat in 2024. He died in March of 2026. Francis wrote those events on a single sheet from Harold's stationery. Then she placed the sheet on top of the file. Justin and Rhonda could say she had influenced their father. They could say Harold was confused. They could say the chalet ought to have been theirs. What they couldn't do was move the dates. On Thursday, Ernest placed 3 proposed agreements on his conference table. One divided the sale proceeds equally among Francis, Justin, and Rhonda. One gave Francis half and divided the other half between them. The third allowed Francis to use the chalet for 5 years before it had to be sold. Francis read each document. Justin sat across from her with Melissa. Rhonda occupied the chair beside him. Albert sat at Francis's right. Ernest waited until she finished. "These are starting points," he said. "A negotiated resolution avoids delay and expense. Which one do you recommend? Francis asked. I represent the estate. That wasn't my question. Ernest removed his glasses. The second proposal may be the most practical. Why? It recognizes your interest while accounting for the children's expected objection. Their objection doesn't create ownership. No, but litigation creates risk. Francis turned to Justin. Did you tell Ernest about your loan? His face hardened. That has nothing to do with Dad's intent. It has everything to do with your hurry. Melissa placed one hand over Justin's wrist. Rhonda leaned forward. And what about my situation? You keep acting like Justin is the only person asking. You lost your job and your marriage ended. I'm sorry for both. You don't sound sorry. I can be sorry without giving you my house. Rhonda sat back. Ernest drew the agreements toward himself. Let's keep the conversation focused. Frances opened her handbag and took out the single sheet of dates. She placed it face down on the table. Albert glanced at her, but said nothing. What exactly are you claiming? Frances asked. Justin answered before Ernest could, that Dad never meant to cut us out. He didn't. You inherited Birchwood, the savings, and both vehicles. He wouldn't give you a lake property worth more than everything else without telling us. He didn't tell me either. That makes no sense. It makes more sense than your version. Justin's voice rose. My version is that you knew he was sick, knew the will didn't give you the house, and found a way around it. Melissa looked toward Ernest. She wanted him to soften the statement, but Ernest couldn't unsay it. Frances kept her hands in her lap. When do you believe I did that? Before he died. That covers a lot of years. You handled his appointments. You handled the mail. You had access to every account. Then why did I leave Birchwood with $612? Justin looked away. Rhonda spoke quietly. You had access to him. That's what Justin means. The sentence landed harder because Rhonda didn't raise her voice. Frances looked at the woman she had known since Rhonda was grown and suspicious of anyone occupying her mother's old rooms. You believe I used his illness to take the chalet. I believe Dad wouldn't have hidden it from us on his own. Frances turned the sheet over but didn't push it across the table. The dates were visible only to her. Harold's trust had existed before his illness. Albert had told Justin that. Ernest had the recorded deed. Still, Justin and Rhonda preferred a story in which Frances had controlled a dying man. That story made their demand feel cleaner. Ernest folded his glasses and set them down. If there's no movement today, my clients will file the objection. Then file it, Frances said. Albert looked at her. You understand the trust may remain under review until the hearing? I understand. Justin leaned toward Melissa. She whispered something Frances couldn't hear. Then he signed the objection authorization Ernest placed before him. Rhonda watched him. Her pen remained on the table. You don't have to do this, Frances said. Rhonda's eyes lifted. You'd like me to leave Justin standing alone. I'd like you to decide for yourself. Rhonda signed. Ernest gathered the papers. The objection was filed the following morning, well inside the 90-day window. The court scheduled a hearing for 3 weeks later at the Bottineau County Courthouse. During those weeks, Frances stayed at the chalet. She didn't begin major changes. Albert advised her to avoid selling, borrowing against, or substantially altering the property while the objection was pending. Living there was permitted, so she lived there. She bought groceries, washed the sheets, and moved the white covers from the furniture into a closet. Nathan repaired a loose porch board. Gordon finished altering Harold's overcoat, narrowing the shoulders and shortening the sleeves while preserving the open seam and cuff. It'll never look made for you, he said when she tried it on. It wasn't, but it fits. Yes, she wore it to the courthouse. The morning of the hearing was clear and cold. Gordon drove. Nathan followed in his truck with the maintenance binders locked behind the seat. David came separately. Patricia met Albert near the courthouse entrance carrying her title report. Justin and Melissa were already inside. Rhonda stood with them near the security station. Nobody greeted anyone. The courtroom was smaller than Frances expected. Wooden benches filled the rear half. The front held 2 counsel tables and a raised bench beneath the state seal. Several people waited for unrelated matters. That was enough to make it public. The allegations would be spoken where strangers could hear them. The record would preserve every word. Ernest approached Albert before the hearing began. My clients are still open to the half-share proposal, he said. Albert looked at Frances. No, she said. Ernest gave a slight nod and returned to Justin. Justin believed her refusal would work against her. He believed the presiding judge would see a widow unwilling to compromise with her husband's children. He had spent the previous night rehearsing answers with Ernest and arranging the facts in the order most useful to him: secret attorney, secret property, hidden papers, hidden key, a wife who managed a sick man's daily life. The recording date troubled him, but he told himself dates didn't reveal pressure. Frances had been Harold's wife in 2015 too. Rhonda's certainty was weaker. She sat beside Justin and looked toward the back row, where Frances had taken a seat between Gordon and Nathan. The altered overcoat looked natural on her. Rhonda recognized it only because of the pale salt mark near the pocket. For a moment, she remembered Harold wearing it outside a church one winter, brushing snow from his shoulders. Then Melissa whispered, "We have to stay together." Rhonda faced forward. The clerk called the matter. Albert and Frances moved to the left counsel table. Ernest sat on the right with Justin and Rhonda. Melissa took a place directly behind them. The judge reviewed the filed objection and confirmed the property in dispute. "Counsel, is there any disagreement that Harold Dean's 1999 will governs the probate estate?" "No," Ernest said. "No disagreement," Albert replied. "And the dispute concerns whether the Lake Medigoshe chalet was validly held by a separate trust?" "Yes," Ernest said. Albert stood. "The trust contends the property was conveyed in 2015 and never entered the probate estate." The judge looked down at the papers. "I'll hear the objectors first." Ernest called Justin. Justin took the witness chair and swore to tell the truth. Ernest began with the family history, Harold's first marriage, and the Birchwood Street house. "Did your father ever tell you he intended to give Frances a lake property?" Ernest asked. "No." "Did he ever mention owning one?" "No." "When did you first learn of it?" "After the funeral, when Frances took documents from his overcoat to another attorney." Frances watched him carefully. She didn't write. Albert had told her to listen for claims, not tone. "What concerned you about that?" Ernest asked. "My father had been ill for years. Frances controlled his medicine, transportation, appointments, and paperwork." "Did your father rely on her?" "For everything." "Did you believe he was capable of managing complicated property arrangements near the end of his life?" "No." Albert wrote the word "end" on his pad and circled it. Ernest continued. "Describe how the trust came to light." Justin looked toward Frances. The exact words hung in the quiet room. "What do you believe happened?" Ernest asked. "I believe Frances knew more than she says. I believe she used Dad's condition to arrange property for herself, then waited until after he died to produce it." Frances felt Gordon shift on the bench behind her. She didn't turn. Justin had committed himself to more than an objection. He had accused her plainly, under oath, in a public courtroom. Ernest asked about the proposed settlement. "We offered her half," Justin said. "She refused everything." "Why did you offer half if you believe the whole property belongs to the estate?" "Because we wanted to avoid this." Melissa nodded from behind him. On cross-examination, Albert asked only 3 questions. "You inherited half the Birchwood Street house?" "Yes." "Half the savings?" "Yes." "And you have a business loan due this summer?" Justin looked at Ernest. "Answer," the judge said. "Yes." Albert sat down. Rhonda testified next. She described summers at Lake Medigoshe and her belief that Harold associated the lake with his first family. She said Frances had gradually become the person through whom all contact with Harold passed. "Did Frances prevent you from visiting?" Ernest asked. "Not directly. Did she discourage it?" "She always said he was tired." "Was he tired?" Rhonda paused. "Usually." "Why do you believe the chalet should be included in the estate?" "Because Dad wouldn't build something tied to our family memories and mean for us never to see it." Her claim wasn't legal, and Ernest knew it, but it explained why she had signed. Albert asked whether Frances had ever mentioned a trust before Harold died. "No." "A chalet?" "No." "Any plan to take property away from you?" "No." He sat down. Melissa wasn't a formal objector, but Ernest called her to explain Justin's understanding and the settlement attempts. She confirmed the business debt. "If the chalet remains with Frances, what happens?" Ernest asked. Melissa clasped her hands. "We may lose the company, and if it's sold as part of the estate, Justin's share would let us pay the bank." There was the full reason, entered into the record by the person most frightened of it. Ernest finished by arguing that secrecy itself raised doubt. Harold hid the property from his children, hid documents and clothing, and used an attorney outside the ordinary estate plan. Francis had benefited from every hidden act. He asked the court to set the trust aside, or delay recognition until Harold's capacity and Francis's influence could be examined further. When he sat down, Justin looked relieved. Everything they wanted the court to hear had now been said. The judge turned toward Albert. "I'll hear the trust's response." Albert rose. "Francis Dean will begin." Francis walked to the witness chair, wearing Harold's altered overcoat. Albert asked what she knew about the chalet before Harold died. "Nothing. The trust? Nothing." "Albert Pham?" His name was sewn inside the coat. "That was the first time I saw it." "Did you ask Harold to buy property at Lake Metagauche?" "No." "Did you help prepare or record the trust?" "No." Albert handed her the yellow tag David had preserved. "What is that?" "The instruction Justin left on Harold's coat. It says nobody wanted it." Justin stared at the table. Francis explained how David returned the overcoat, how Gordon found the deed fragment, and how the separate cuff held the key. She didn't make the event sound mysterious. A coat had been discarded. A funeral director had kept it. A tailor had opened a seam. Albert placed the full trust deed before her. "When did you first see this?" "In the bank viewing room." 16 days after Harold's funeral?" "Yes." "Could you have altered a document that had been in a locked safe deposit box?" "No." Ernest rose for cross-examination. "You managed Harold's affairs while he was ill?" "I managed our household and his medical care." "You had opportunities to discuss his will?" "Yes." "Did you?" "Many times." "And you knew it left the main estate to his children?" "I knew he wanted them protected." "I didn't know he'd never revised it." Ernest glanced at Justin. "Yet you expect the court to believe Harold secretly created a second plan and never told you." "I don't expect the court to believe me. I brought the county record." Albert called Patricia. She took the witness chair with her report and explained the title trail. Harold purchased the property in 2010. The complete chalet parcel entered the trust in October of 2015. The recorder scanned and indexed the deed that same day. Could this transfer have been created after Harold's diagnosis and given an earlier date? Albert asked. No. The instrument number falls in the county's 2015 recording sequence. The fees were paid then. The scanned pages have remained unchanged. When was Harold diagnosed with the terminal heart condition? According to the undisputed medical record, 2020. 5 years later. Yes. Albert submitted Patricia's report. Then Nathan identified the maintenance contract and 8 binders of work records beginning in 2018. Every payment came through the trust. Gordon identified his alteration book from 2024. He described Harold's clear instructions for the reinforced seam and cuff. David identified the funeral home property log and confirmed that Francis didn't receive the coat until after Harold's death. Finally, Albert submitted Harold's letter. Ernest objected that affection wasn't proof of legal capacity. I agree, Albert said. The letter explains purpose. The recorded deed proves ownership. That was the decisive difference. Harold's private words mattered to Francis, but the chalet didn't belong to her because the letter was moving. It belonged to the trust because Harold had transferred it properly 11 years before his death. The judge reviewed the original recording, Patricia's report, and the trust certification. The objectors have offered suspicion, the judge said. They have not offered evidence that Francis Dean influenced the 2015 transfer, participated in it, or knew it existed. Justin lowered his head. The Lake Metagauche property was not part of Harold Dean's probate estate at death. The 1999 will therefore has no authority over it. The objection is dismissed. The gavel came down once. There was no cheering. Francis returned to her seat and buttoned the overcoat with hands that remained steady. Outside the courtroom, Justin stood beside a stone wall while Melissa spoke quietly to Ernest. The business debt was still waiting. Losing the objection hadn't created it, and winning wouldn't have made the way he treated Francis acceptable. Rhonda approached Francis alone. I'm not asking for money, she said. All right. I'd like to see the lake again, just once. Francis looked past her toward Justin. Are you asking for him too? No, I'm asking for myself. You can visit. You call first, and you don't arrive with papers for me to sign. Rhonda nodded. I'm sorry about the motel. Francis didn't tell her it was forgiven. You should be, she said. A week later, Rhonda came to the chalet. She and Francis sat on the porch with coffee, while the last ice loosened along the shore. Rhonda spoke about the rental cabin her parents once used. Frances listened. Then she told Rhonda which room Harold had planned as a main-floor bedroom, and how carefully he'd marked every instruction manual. They didn't repair 28 years in an afternoon. When Rhonda left, she took no key. She did take a photograph of the water and one of Harold's restoration pictures after asking permission. Justin never visited. He and Melissa sold one of the company trucks and negotiated more time with the bank. Rhonda used her Birchwood share to rent a smaller place and begin looking for work. They kept what the will gave them. They didn't get the chalet. Albert asked Frances whether she wanted to sell. The appraisal remained $430,000, and Lake property was attracting buyers. Frances walked through the rooms before answering. The chalet was too large for one person all year, but it wasn't too large for useful work. Harold had left a reserve. Frances had experience making beds, preparing meals, keeping accounts, and noticing what people needed before they asked. She decided to open a small guest house. Nathan stayed as caretaker under a new contract bearing Frances's name. Gordon repaired curtains, shortened tablecloths, and complained that nobody respected proper hems anymore. They worked through the summer. One downstairs room became an accessible guest room. The upstairs bedroom facing the trees received 2 reading lamps and a quilt Frances found in her storage unit. Nathan repaired the porch rail and built a bench near the water. Frances painted the guest house sign herself, Harold's Rest. The letters weren't perfectly even. Gordon offered to correct them. "They're readable," Frances said. "They lean." So did Harold. They hung the sign beside the gate. The first guests were a retired couple from Grand Forks who wanted 3 quiet nights near the lake. Frances showed them the coffee, towels, and porch blankets. Nathan carried their bags upstairs. At breakfast, they ate Frances's cinnamon toast at the long table and asked whether the chalet had always been a guest house. "No," Frances said. "It took a while to become what it was for." By autumn, weekends were booking steadily. The income covered taxes, upkeep, Nathan's wages, and a modest amount for Frances. She kept the trust intact. Gordon brought the overcoat back after one final repair. He had closed the inner seam, but left a small line of contrasting thread inside the cuff. "So you can find the place again," he said. "The key isn't there anymore, I know." Frances hung the coat by the front door. The yellow tag remained in its pocket, folded and worn. She kept it because the words no longer decided anything. If stories about reclaiming dignity after family abandonment matter to you, subscribe and return for the next inheritance story. On the first cold evening of November, Frances closed the guest house after dinner and checked the lock at the gate. Nathan's porch light shone through the trees. Gordon had gone home after fixing a torn chair cushion. Frances returned to the chalet and turned the key in the front door. Her suitcase was no longer on the bench upstairs. It had been unpacked for months and stored beneath the bed. She switched on the porch lamp, set 2 clean cups on the breakfast table for the morning's guests, and stepped outside in Harold's mended overcoat. The lake was dark and still. Warm light spread across the porch boards behind her. Frances sat beneath it, with the key to her home resting in her pocket.